Good evening. For the last few chapters in the course, we're going to be looking at the issue of pollution. As I noted earlier in the course, our challenge today is not only to produce more resources to sustain our growing human population, but to also protect the mechanisms that generate those resources, namely our ecosystems. Ironically, our growing population is what's causing a large amount of pollution in the world, which are the major challenge to maintaining those ecosystems. So in these last couple of chapters, we're going to look at what damage is being done to our valuable ecosystems, what we can do to minimize and prevent it, and in some success stories, what we've already done to help mitigate some of those problems. We'll begin with the issue of water pollution. We begin our study of water pollution by looking at the issue of the infamous dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. The dead zone is a huge area of water off the coast of southern United States, stretching from Texas through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and actually up into parts of Florida. This dead zone, as its name implies, is an area of the Gulf of Mexico where there are literally no fish, no shellfish, and no plant life growing. It is literally dead, and of course is a serious economic disadvantage to the people that depend upon the Gulf of Mexico to make their living. This dead zone is not the result of pollution from the oil spill of a couple of years ago. This dead zone is the result of pollution that empties into the Gulf of Mexico from the Mississippi River. The process which caused this dead zone is known as eutrophication, a process that we'll spend some time looking at in this particular chapter. Eutrophication is what happens when large amounts of nutrients, particularly phosphates and nitrogen compounds, enter into a water area, and microscopic bacteria, plankton actually, plants, feed on these nutrients and grow out of control. You may have seen something similar to this in local waterways when you see that green slime that sometimes forms on the tops of ponds and lakes and things of that nature. That green slime is the result of the overgrowth of microscopic plants that then take over a water habitat, use up all of its nutrients, and also shut off sunlight from the plants growing underneath the water. When this eutrophication, as we call it, occurs in a water system, it causes the death of everything within that water system. Why is it in the Gulf of Mexico, and why is it so big? It's because those nutrients are coming and feeding into the Gulf of Mexico from the Mississippi River. Almost 1/3 of the United States borders along the Mississippi River basin. And all of the farmlands that are within that middle third of the United States, which use fertilizers of many different kinds, herbicides, and other types of chemicals in order to enhance the growth of plants and minimize the invasion by diseases that would otherwise destroy their crop. All of those things that get sprayed on farmland eventually, as a result of rain and irrigation, get washed off into local waterways, which then all eventually feed into the Mississippi River, and the Mississippi River flows from the north all the way to the south and eventually empties into the Gulf of Mexico. So this huge dead zone is the result of all the fertilizer, insecticides, and herbicides that are being emptied into the Gulf of Mexico via the Mississippi River that were originally applied on Midwestern farmlands. This dead zone has serious consequences, as I indicated earlier, for the livelihood of people that utilize the Gulf for their living, and has implications if we are unable to stop and reverse this process of growing the dead zone. In order to fight pollution, it's necessary to know what's causing it and where it's coming from. For this purpose, environmentalists tend to classify pollutants as being one of two types, either point source pollutants or non-point source pollutants. Point source pollutants are those that come from, as the name would suggest, a specific point, most often something such as a pipe or a sewer or some other specific outlet where the pollution is going directly into the waterway. Non-point source pollutants are more difficult because they are the result of drainage over large areas of land, such as fertilizers and herbicides that will run off of large areas of cropland as a result of rain washing them into the water, or the effluent from cities and suburbs that put various chemicals and fertilizers and things on their lawns and again get washed into the rivers. Non-point source solution or pollutants are difficult to deal with because you can't pinpoint a specific person or a specific cause or a specific person to blame for those pollutants being in the area. But for those pollutants that are generated from point source solutions, the government has been able to institute policies and procedures and fines if necessary to get the people that are causing the pollution to stop polluting and in many cases to restore and clean up the very waterways that they've polluted. Up until about 30 years ago, one of the biggest polluters of waterways were cities and villages and towns where people lived. And this was because of the fact that sewer systems were put in place, as we studied in an earlier chapter, to help carry away the waste of living in urban areas. And this was a good thing because of the fact that it helped to minimize contamination or cross-contamination of sewer water, which contained waste, and drinking water, which people obviously needed to drink. And by separating the drinking water system from the wastewater system, they were able to greatly reduce the chances of disease, which obviously contributed to the increase in human lifespan. But for a long time, nothing was really thought about where those wastes were going. In fact, the mantra for many years was that the solution to pollution is dilution. So by taking all that sewage and dumping it into the local river, stream, or lake, that was the way things were done, and people never really thought much about it until the issue began to come back at us in terms of disease and eutrophication and other pollution to our waterways that began affecting our ability to use those waters. When society began to realize, and more particularly government began to realize the source of this problem, they began to mandate and put in place various systems for treating wastewater before releasing it into local streams and tributaries. The process by which this waste is purified is actually quite complicated and is shown in the attached diagram. Raw sewage that is generated from homes and businesses goes through a multiple process of screening to get rid of large materials, settling in big settling tanks to allow the finer materials to settle out and clarify the water that's up on top. Some of you, if you drive south on I-55 in the summer in particular, may notice a rather strong odor on the south side of I-55, just south of probably after Cicero and somewhere in that area. And that's due to the fact that the Metropolitan Water Reclamation plant down there uses this process for separating raw sewage from water. And what you're smelling, of course, is the sewage. Anyhow, the water that is separated here then is passed on to other aeration tanks where processes are used to help kill bacteria. They may also put into their chlorine and other things to kill off the bacteria. Again, they separate off the solid material, which is called sludge, and through one final clarification and settling tank, they produce water, which is 99% or more pure water in terms of having removed organic waste as well as waste and bacteria that grow on that waste from the water. In many cases, the water that's returned to the local tributary is as clean or cleaner than the water which was taken out of that tributary in order to provide the water that's used in our homes. In order to understand the process of eutrophication, we need to know a little bit about aquatic plant life. Aquatic plant life can be divided into two broad categories, one known as benthic plants, the other known as phytoplankton. Benthic plants are the ones that we see growing out of the water or growing submerged in the water. In both cases, though, these plants depend upon and are embedded in via their roots to the soil of the ecosystem. And they draw from the soil the necessary nutrients to sustain their life, combined with sunlight shining down on them, either because they're above the water or if the water is clear as it should be, through the water. Through the process of photosynthesis, then, these green plants are able to grow and thrive in a healthy ecosystem. Phytoplankton are microscopic plants, and there are many different types that grow within the water. Typically, they're kept under control in terms of their growth by virtue of the fact that most clean waterways are have relatively few floating nutrients in them, and consequently these plants are limited by the lack of nutrients. However, when excess nutrients get into a waterway and provide the food necessary for the phytoplankton to grow, that's when we run into the process and the problem of eutrophication. Here you can see what happens when eutrophication takes over an aquatic ecosystem. At the beginning, you start out with a healthy aquatic ecosystem in which the water is clear. There is a balance between the plant life and the marine habitat life, such that everybody is getting the proper balance of nutrients in order to sustain their life. This clean, clear water with a minimal amount of dissolved nutrients is termed oligotrophic water. It is the way you want an ecosystem to be. However, when there is a large amount of nutrient input, much as what happened in the case of the Mississippi River and the formation of the dead zone, the phytoplankton, the microscopic plants that live in the water, grow out of control, feeding upon those nutrients. When they grow out of control, they form this thick mat of algae and green slime that covers the water. And these phytoplankton not only screen off sunlight from the water, which kills the underground plants, but they also use up all of the oxygen that's dissolved in the water, which then kills the various fish and other shellfish that are in the area, so that eventually then everything becomes totally dead and the water becomes putrefied, if you will, from this dead, rotting material. And we call this dead zone eutrophic water. So what has and is being done to fight the problem of water pollution? Well, quite a number of things in the United States, beginning most importantly with the Clean Water Act of 1972. This important legislation established the guidelines by which the Environmental Protection Agency could monitor water, determine who is causing pollution of the water, and levy the fines necessary to not only stop the pollution, but force the polluters to clean up what they've destroyed. This was extremely important in remediating many badly damaged waterways and helping to reestablish many of the sensitive marine habitats around the United States. In 1977, there were amendments were made to the Clean Water Act to strengthen them even more so than they had been in the original legislation. And then finally in 1987, the Water Quality Act was established to again provide greater oversight on our federal waterways, our local waterways, and to empower local governments to enforce that their waters remain unpolluted and that they are of the quality necessary for maintaining life as we have it here in the United States.